As a kid, I was always looking for ways to get more games. If my parents took me into the store, you can bet the puppy eyes were coming out as soon as we got anywhere close to the games section. And so, deep within the halls of TJ Maxx, just where my parents thought they were safe amongst all the clothes and other boring grown-up stuff, lo and behold, there was a video game rack. And what, you may ask, was the jewel that I found amongst the ragtag rubble? Why, Creature's Playground, of course! Let's take a look at this vital piece of my childhood. Oh, no. Oh, gosh, okay. Someone's eyes are bigger than their stomach. Now, my game disc of Creature's Playground isn't compatible with my new computer, so I found a download of it on Good Old Games. Their version is called Creature's Village, which is a combination of Creature's Playground and the maker's first game, Creature's Adventures. So this will be part familiar and part new. Let's jump into Creature's Village. When we first get into the village, we are presented with a nursery and 2 eggs. We get an arrow that points at the egg and then points at the cradle. Simple enough, but it's worthy to note that this is about the only instruction we'll receive from a game aimed at 5 to 9-year-olds. A short jingle later and out pops our first Norn, which are the titular creatures of the game. It has been ordained by these bubbles that her name is Sophie, and who am I to argue? And I have to admit, Sophie is actually pretty cute compared to all this box art that we've been seeing. The same cannot be said for our second Norn, Chris. Chris is, well, let's just say that this type of Norn is called Primrose and leave it at that. So let's quickly go over how you can interact with your Norn. You take the guise of this Mickey Mouse glove and can try to get your Norn to follow you by snapping at them. You can also praise them with tickles or hose them down when they don't behave. But if a Norn isn't doing what you want, you can also forcibly drag them to where you want them to go. Finally, since the Norns will often go separate from each other, you can click on one of their portraits to go where they are. As we go back to the game, we can see that the Norns age very quickly and are rapidly graduating from hatching to opening doors and going wherever they damn well please. Sophie has already moved on to bigger and better things, but Chris sticks around just long enough for us to go to the wardrobe room and give him a snazzy top hat. At this point, things start getting out of hand when your Norns go outside. There's just so much going on, from all the animals in the background, all the various things your Norn can interact with, and all the things you can interact with. This is really frustrating and confusing, especially since we are just starting out the game and are learning how to play. And it's not clear what you can and cannot use. You'll often end up rapidly snapping at your Norn when all you're trying to do is get the umbrella! Why can't I get the umbrella? This confusion is compounded by your Norn's behavior, since they can rapidly go inside and outside. Sometimes they'll go into a room for a few seconds and then decide to turn around and leave. They're like monster cats. But even though they can do whatever they want, you can only go to a new location by clicking their portrait. Most of the time, your camera follows the Norn instead of you controlling it. You don't get to control the game as much as fight it for control. I mean, hypothetically, you could just watch the game after you hatch a Norn and let it fend for itself. How crazy is that? To the right, we quickly run into this. And a swarm of bees. We can hear Sophie give audible yelps of pain, so clearly that's a bad idea. I believe this is the creature adventure parts of the game, so it's great that an entire half of the game is so welcoming. Chris has wandered far enough to make it to the playground, the game that I played as a kid. It's here that we encounter our first minigame, Mud Whack-A-Mole. Once you pick up the mallet, your camera isn't centered around your Norn anymore, but again, we get no explanation as how to play and have to infer everything. This would normally be fine for a game like Whack-A-Mole, but there's just a whole lot more going on in the background. There's a mud man that pops up for just long enough to not hit him with your mallet, a bird that comes by and picks up a chunk of mud, and a prize system represented by this mud meter. I guess nowadays I'm used to everything telling you how to do it or forcing you through a tutorial. There is validity in the teach by doing instead of telling approach, but there's a difference between, say, letting your kid go when he's riding a bicycle and just plopping your kid down somewhere and saying, do the thing! You know, the thing! But these puzzle pieces show the game does have an overarching goal, which I think sets it apart from the put flashy and loud things in front of small children style of entertainment, despite the multitude of flashy and loud things. All these carnival style minigames get you a puzzle piece if you do well enough, plus there are a couple of harder to get ones. I never finished the puzzle as a kid, so I'm excited to finally see what happens. We see Chris visibly grow, which is a neat touch. Then when I go to check back on Sophie, it starts raining and getting dark, so I get her back inside. When I try making a cake, I discover that instead of you adding the ingredients, you just tell the book what kind of cake you want and it'll throw it together for you. Eggshells and all. More interestingly, and to my surprise, Sophie has dressed herself in a sombrero. I was happy she was old enough to embrace her inner mariachi band. When I go back for Chris, he's cold and just sitting there, so I grab him and haul him all the way back to the house, which includes going past this freaking swamp monster alligator thing. For a world that's supposed to be child-friendly, there sure is a whole lot of horrifying stuff going on. I finally get Chris back into the house, where he decides to ignore the only food that we have in favor of being hungry. As the day broke, I finally get Chris to go eat some apples, and while I go to check on Sophie, he stays out in the rain too long despite having an umbrella. This leads him to becoming sick. So, what do Norns do when they feel sick? Dress up as Elvis, of course. What? You take that nap, little guy. You deserve it. The Norns grow in size again as Chris dons his finest Easter hat and Sophie picks out Uggs and gloves to go with her matching hat. I managed to keep them both inside, which in retrospect might not have been the best idea. The younger viewers may want to avert their eyes at this point. Chris, of course, falls asleep at the end of that furious balloon-making session, so I decide to head down to the playground with Sophie. I skip Whack-A-Mole and head to the haunted house ride, which is what I remember most from playing the game as a kid. The idea of the ride is to make sure your Norn doesn't get too scared. You do this by clicking the spooky thing at the right moment, deactivating it in some way. I find this curious because the whole point of a haunted house ride is to be spooked, but I guess these guys are about 10 minutes old, so I suppose they're still pretty impressionable. I mean, just look at their eyes here. They have gazed into the abyss, and it gazed back. Then, in between the spooky things, green floating eyeballs, yes, green floating eyeballs, drift across the screen, and you have to click them to pop them and fill up your meter. Again, Whack-A-Mole-esque, but this one I actually managed to do the first time around, netting us the first puzzle piece. Next up is a standard water shooter carnival game, nautically themed. There doesn't seem to be a water limit and the time runs very slowly, so just shoot away to get more items in a puzzle piece. And while I was fiddling around, Sophie sauntered up to the strength tester and beasted it to get our third hot dog. At this point, you can do the cover advertised main attraction, which is building a roller coaster for your Norn. Some of the collectibles you've been getting are more pieces for the coaster. And boy, let me tell ya, is it one heck of a ride. A helicopter thingamabob comes to take Sophie's hat for some reason, but conveniently we discover a shop with all new clothes. I throw some on Sophie, but quickly regret it as I don't know how to undo it. I got her back to the house to try to reverse it, but I only made it worse. I'm sorry, Sophie. In the meantime, Chris has become very sick, so he gets whisked away to this traveling doctor horse, where we stick him in a machine to magically take away all his illnesses. Take that, years of medical school. We turn our attention back to Sophie, so I grab her and shoot her into outer space! Which means these guys have mastered space travel and instant matter teleportation. So where exactly are we boldly going? On what incredible alien planet will we proudly plant our flag? It's a winter wonderland. Yay. It's a little strange wearing a spacesuit here, but Sophie is a trendsetter. If you toss your Norn to the chairlift, you'll get to play the next minigame, where you luge down the slope. It's pretty simple. There are 2 tracks for the sled to go down, and you click to move where there aren't things to run into. Avoid enough and pick up enough speed to hurdle the puzzle piece and earn it. First try. Unfortunately, spacesuits aren't the best for insulating against the cold, so Sophie got sick. I could not figure out how to get her back down to Earth, so she had to be emergency lifted from space back to the doctor machine. At this point, I did track down a manual online, which explains a lot about how the world works. I think it's still overwhelming to not get any explanation in-game, but I did learn a few things. For example, you can reset a Norn's clothes by grabbing a hanger and hanging up their clothes. This was especially useful information as I had just mummified Sophie. Whoopsie. I gave Chris another chance and took him on a tour of the creature's adventure part of the game, but in my opinion it wasn't as good as the creature's playground part. so we're gonna skip back to that. So I caved and looked up just how you get the remaining puzzle pieces. First, you head to the swamp and fish until you haul up bones. We've been getting these at various places, like defeating a certain skeleton in the haunted house ride. If we head into the cave far left of the playground, we encounter another monster that roars at us for disturbing it. But if we collect all the bones, we summon Cave Norn, who scares the monster, who drops the puzzle piece. I think this is a pretty convoluted one to get, especially considering how many times I had to fish in the swamp for a piece of bone. I left Cave Norn to himself since I can't actually interact with him, and ventured deeper into the cave, where we discovered a secret laboratory. Here you can change your Norn's color or hairdo, but if you use the transmogrifier, you can change them into a mouse, and they'll scurry to the puzzle piece. Shove your mouse Norn back into the transmogrifier, which will revert your Norn. Play the water gun game again for a second puzzle piece. Defeat Whack-A-Mole by clicking rapidly. At this point, I stopped getting puzzle pieces because I knew there was a vital part we were missing out on, and I wanted to do it before the end. Namely, filling up the empty bubbles with new Norns. Basically, we needed more balloon making sessions for, well, you know. But even though I waited through plenty of kissing noises, it just didn't seem to happen. Chris kept getting sick or sleeping, so that didn't really help. I gave up and went to the last piece, which is back at Winter Wonderland. You get it by clicking on a bunch of penguins, which I doubt I ever would have figured out after clicking the first one and getting nothing out of it.
After that, what we've been waiting for. A parade! Just listen to this jubilant celebration.
The parade gives us a brand new car! We also see that Cave Norn isn't adapting so well to being brought back from the dead.
No. Yes, among having to explain how babies are made, this game encourages parents to talk to their kids about death. It's pretty impressive considering the game looks and plays like a cheap distraction for your kids. I imagine a lot of parents left their kids alone with this game and came back to have a lot of explaining to do. I myself didn't go through to the end to see my Norns die. I tried, but it was taking a long time and I wanted to move on to other things. So was Creatures Village a good nostalgia trip? Well, yes and no. As a kid, I was really frustrated by not being able to find all the puzzle pieces, and as an adult, even more so, and really annoyed with the controls. Plus, the payoff I've been waiting years to see was just okay. The game was great for some laughs at Chris's expense, and I can see how I enjoyed the world and the noises as a kid. Plus, the egg laying and death mechanic adds a whole nother layer of complexity that I just wasn't expecting to the game. Creatures 3 apparently adds even more depth, so even though I have no intention of playing it, you might want to check it out for yourself. Thank you for watching, and if you'll excuse me...
What?